Hello and welcome back to Sparky's Dream, a podcast about Manchester United. It's been quite the week at Old Trafford as we once again find ourselves taking another spin around the managerial merry-go-round, or not so merry-go-round, depends on your views on the manager and board. We also saw Darren Fletcher being thrust into the hot seat to take charge of our trip to Burnley, so we'll have a look how he changed things up and what this means for the squad going forward and where realistically we're likely to be come the summer. So it's been quite the week. It's been hard to keep up with everything that's been going on at Old Trafford since our draw away to Leeds on Sunday. In fact, even after 90 minutes, there wasn't much to report apart from another frustrating performance by us. Cunha and Sesko were the only attack-minded players who started that game, so I guess you could say we didn't deserve to win the game in that respect. I'm really not sure how we get to a point where we only field two attack-minded players, for God's sake. But it wasn't until the press conference after the match that things took a remarkable turn. Amorim called out the board in an extraordinary outburst from what, on the seams on the face of it, a pretty normal press conference up until that point. I mean, he definitely used it as an opportunity to back him or sack him, or at least that's one of the connotations. But in reality, I mean, he's not stupid. I think he was very much issuing the board a writ, one that he knew they wouldn't have any other option than to pull the trigger on him. And if the relationship between the board and the head coach has reached those kinds of levels, then surely it's best for all parties that they part ways. I can't say I'm too disappointed that he's gone. I'm not one for calling out managers, etc. I'm a Manchester United fan and I'll take whatever we have on offer and I'll back them and watch them regardless of how shit we are. I mean, those things are non-negotiable, aren't they? But I must say, I did find myself becoming less and less enamoured with Amorim over the course of the last month or so. We're all frustrated with the way the squad has been trying to adapt to his way of playing since he came in. His record speaks for itself. I mean, it's not great, is it? But the petulance and defensiveness that started creeping into his press has started to show that he was evidently becoming frustrated with the line of questioning about the formation and squad. Can't really blame him considering the amount of times the club puts him forward to do media duties, but ultimately the way to answer the critics is to show results, isn't it? Justification of your systems and actions, but although we could argue that performances have improved in spurts this season, the overall results have left a lot to be desired. I mean, I think Wolves was the final straw for me personally, going back to a 3-4-3 after a win at home against Newcastle, one of the perceived better teams in and around us. Stated that he wanted to match Wolves' setup at home against one of the worst Premier League teams I've ever witnessed. I mean, that's just pretty unforgivable, isn't it? I'm reading between the lines and thinking that that might have been the instigator for the meeting with Wilcox. I've seen Wilcox get a lot of heat from fans mostly since Monday, but if a director of football with any credibility didn't hold an emergency meeting with a head coach after that Wolves match, then I think there should be bigger questions. I mean, one of the biggest frustrations I've had with him, though, was his treatment of Cobby. I mean, continually intimating that he isn't deserving of a place in this starting lineup, that he needs to earn his place with performances and training, and when he gets his chance on the pitch, that no young player should have a God-given right to walk straight into the first team. Cobby scored in the FA Cup final win over City. He started the European Championship final for England. He's been at the heart of so many of United's great moments and performances since he was introduced into the first team by Ten Hag. I mean, arguably, he was the catalyst for Amorim's greatest moment at United when he levelled things against Lyon before Maguire went on to get the winner. I've just gone back and watched the highlights of that game and the absolute joy on that kid's face when he scores. And then again, when Maguire scores, it's just an absolute million miles away from the sombre kind of disconsolate figure we've seen sat at the bench this season. Cobby potentially is a generational talent, a huge win for the academy. This guy is trying to tell me that he's not good enough to even occasionally start for Manchester United. In that press conference where he went after Harry Amas, Chido and Toby Collier just to justify his views on Cobby was just so naive and unnecessary. From that point onwards, it started to remind me of the end of Mourinho's reign, stubborn and petulant, divisive. I haven't really got patience for that. We're bigger than that, aren't we? We're better than that. Youth, courage, success. I'm afraid he failed on all three counts. Obviously, there's questions over the board's first couple of years at the helm too. they have to share part of the blame here. Although we've seen a structure and hierarchy implemented that this club has seemingly been crying out for years, the relative inexperience of the people propelled into these positions has proved divisive and hardly uniformed in thinking. I get that there would be teething problems, but I think we'd all hoped that they would have been identified and ironed out sooner than they have. As well as the redundancies and ticket price increases, you could point at the three major footballing decisions that they've had to make, giving Ten Hag extra time, hiring and firing best-in-class Dan Ashworth, and then hiring a unique systems coach in Amorim with an obviously unbalanced squad. These two now feel like three major fails. In hindsight, if you can get past the alleged Southgate rhetoric, I think firing Dan Ashworth could end up being their biggest regret. If him and Wilcox were apparently opposed to Amorim's appointment in the first place, it's not really a good look, is it? Okay, let's move on to the Burnley match. I've got a bit more on Amorim that I wrote for something else. Maybe I'll put that at the end of the pod. We've all absorbed so much Amorim information last week, so let's try and inject some positivity for now, anyway. United moved swiftly after dismissing Amorim and gave Darren Fletcher, football genius, our Andre Dean's coach, the chance of stepping into the dugout for the upcoming couple of games at least. Burnley away and then Brighton at home in the FA Cup at Old Trafford on Sunday. There was absolutely no chance that Fletcher was going to play a back three. Pre-game, all the noise was that Bruno was back in training, pushing for a start, so it was almost inevitable that he'd switch us back to a 4-2-3-1. Bruno was indeed back in that familiar number 10 position. Maybe the one surprise was that he started Cunha on the right-hand side and Dogu on the left, considering how good Dogu had performed in that more advanced right-hand side recently. I think it was an opportunity to utilise the squad that we currently have available and put player profiles in more familiar positions. I think we were all hoping that we'd come out of the blocks firing on all cylinders, everyone looking instantly familiar with the surroundings. You know, football can, frustratingly, be a very simple game if played well. Didn't quite happen like that. I wouldn't say we looked nervy, just I think we took a while to come to terms with everything. I mean, there'd been some seismic changes for the squad in the previous 48 hours, so I guess we can afford them going behind to a jammy deflected goal early on. The own goal went to Aiden Heaven, but in reality it was Casemiro, one of the experienced heads, who we'd expect to be extra vigilant considering the circumstances, who totally switched off and didn't track his runner. United grew into the game though, we came a bit more composed. Casemiro and Ugarte become more of a destructive force, I guess. Ugarte really does divide opinion, doesn't he? I saw a lot of comments that he was having a bad game and shouldn't be on the pitch, whereas I actually thought he had one of his better games for us. His pressing and hounding was intense. He broke up a lot of play and made a lot of interceptions, which in turn became the catalyst for our in-possession tempo. Those quick turnovers need to be acted on immediately, don't they, to take advantage of the disarray that they caused in the first place. I think he was key in this respect for getting us back into the game and getting us playing. We don't really need to talk about him in possession anymore, do we? But the destroyer and simple layoff of Ugarte, for me, does have its benefits. Bruno, for the first 20-odd minutes, looked like he'd been out with a hamstring strain for a few weeks, to be honest. Burnley gave him some extra attention, but he found a way to get on the ball more and more as the half went on, started showing small glimpses of what we've missed by having him sitting deeper for the last 14 months. It's amazing that his numbers were still crazy whilst, sitting back further, but when pushed up, you can see the extra chaos that he can bring to an already uncertain defence. Cunha definitely struggled being pushed out to the right of that three during that first half. I'm not sure what the thinking was there, especially as I've mentioned, like Dogu having one of the best games for us in that advanced right role. Maybe it was just to cause a bit more confusion to Scott Parker from the off. I don't know. I haven't heard what Fletcher's said about it post-match, but he was hardly in the game for the majority of that first half. Fletcher mentioned that he'd issued strong words of encouragement to Sesko prior to the match. He lacked a bit of service for the majority of the first half, to be honest, but United really started to turn the screw towards the end of that half and probably would have hoped that they could play for an extra 5 minutes, as Sesko and Dogu both had really good chances. Fletcher recognised that there was a bit of an imbalance in front at half-time, and he did make a small but important tweak. He swapped Bruno and Cunha in those advanced positions. He had to try and get them both in the game somehow, as Cunha was so ineffective in that first half. But as it turned out, United came out and picked up where they left off in that first half, really on the front foot, and it only took 5 minutes for Bruno to find Sesko with an inch-perfect pass to put him into some space. And then he slotted it past their keeper into the opposite corner. I love this goal. It was quick, assured and clinical. I mean, that's exactly what Bruno can do when he's that close to the box. He can unlock the space where it doesn't seem like there's anything on. If we've got a bright, confident striker making intelligent movements in the box and with the pace and strength to find that yard of space, then we're going to create plenty of chances. And on Wednesday, Sesko showed that he can be that guy. You know, he created a shitload of chances. I mean, it was 30 in total, and I think Sesko ended up with 7 shots on target. 10 minutes later, he put us in front. Dorgu, a willing runner and ball carrier down the left for the whole game, whips in the perfect cross for Sesko to open up his foot and just deftly steer it past their keeper. Again, clearly his confidence was high after the first goal as he executed that, finished absolutely perfectly. Dorgu's really stepped up in the last few weeks. I mean, he's a proper athlete, isn't he? So he gives you that energy and is always ready to receive the ball and take us upfield. I think he's the most foul player in the Premier League this season so far. But up until recently, we've all kind of been frustrated with his lack of service, the final decisive ball. On times it looked like it just wasn't going to come for him, but things are starting to stick now, I think. His linking passes with those inside 10 seem crisper and aren't killing the momentum. Also, I think we can't underestimate the impact of Luke Shaw being far more involved in the final third in recent times either, certainly since that kind of Everton game. Shaw being higher up gives more passing options and passing lanes. Also, as we saw with Rashford, like Shaw just provides that extra bit of insurance if he's closer and higher up the pitch. And it's an opportunity for Dorgu just to be a bit more expressive, like we saw with Rashford. Rather disappointingly, Burnley got an equaliser when we were very much on top. Leacher should be very disappointed with his defending for this one. Turned his back and just gave that guy far too much room to get his shot away. Again, it just goes to show that you can't switch off or afford anyone any space near our box. It feels like we've conceded so many goals like this recently, maybe since De Ligt has been injured, possibly. It feels like they need someone to be screaming and barking orders, and Leacher is probably the only one that does that out of that starting back four. Cobby got around 30 minutes as a sub in this game. Apparently he started back training the day Amorim got sacked, so he was still going to be edging his way back to fitness. It did feel that he was trying to be a bit more positive than the rest of his cameos this year. It wasn't a passive display by any means. I mean, this will definitely feel like a fresh start for him after an incredibly frustrating season. And we'll forgive him for that rash, long-range effort, which definitely felt like a fuck you moment. And talking of long-range efforts, Shea Lacey's small cameo nearly produced one of the goals of the season. We've all been hearing big things about this kid for the last 3 years, and after a load of injuries, he's finally been integrated into the first team squad. And what a way to cement your place and show the club that you're ready. It was fucking brilliant. Fletcher told him to be positive when he came on, and he did just that, picking the ball up wide on the right, driving into the edge of the box and then smashing one against the crossbar. I was out of my seat, and then a few minutes later, confidence high as it was, he did the same again. This one just going narrowly over the bar. But what a moment that would have been for Lacey, the club and the academy. Despite a draw and more drop points in matches we really should be winning, this game did feel like a fresh start for the club, and for me too. I mean, I haven't really enjoyed watching us for a while now. Even games we win, like the Newcastle game, I was just questioning, like, how could we play so badly in the second half? And once again, United had become like a hard grind, tough to watch, tough to enjoy, but this match felt like a weight had been lifted, even for me watching. And going to the Brighton game on Sunday, and although that's a must-win, really, hopefully after a few more sessions with Fletcher, we won't be as passive in the first 30 minutes as we were against Burnley, as Brighton we feel have a bit more quality about them, and they'll be looking to capitalise on any nervousness or indecision. So I won't be surprised if we see Maguire back in the lineup instead of Heaven. Not that Heaven's been playing bad at all, I mean, quite the opposite, but I think we just need a bit more experience on the field. Try and stop conceding silly goals. The cup is far less forgiving. I wouldn't be surprised if we don't see any outgoings this month now. The end of Amorim's reign will signal a fresh start for many of these players. I mean, it's highly unlikely that whoever comes in for the rest of the season is going to overlook Cobby's qualities. In fact, they're likely to be under direct instruction for Wilcox, who apparently favours a 4-3-3. So a midfield of Casemiro, Cobby and Bruno definitely feels like a complementary midfield trio to me. And it's pretty amazing that we haven't really seen that much of it. Xerxes, while the jury is still out on his quality and where his best position is, we are still short in front of goal. It's highly unlikely that we'll invest in a striker this month, so I think it would still be beneficial to keep him around until the summer, especially if we can put a cup run together too. So who do you think would be our caretaker head coach for the rest of the season? At the time of recording this, it looks like a two-horse race between Ollie and Michael Carrick. There's not much being said about them working together. I mean, now that Carrick too has a bit of managerial experience, the impact Ollie had when he was appointed caretaker for the first time was absolutely fantastic. I mean, it really lifted everyone's spirits and he got people playing with confidence. Although he's got tactical nuance as well, he proved that he could also be that kind of vibes guy and get the new manager bounce. Whoever it is, I think the vibes aspect is very important. I mean, that's where Ragnick fell short, wasn't it? We just need to lift spirits for the next 5 months. There is quality throughout the squads, and if played in a system they understand and the right profiles and the right positions, then the season is very much salvageable. I'm not sure how ambitious Ineos are feeling right now about the next permanent manager, but the top tier level, I'm thinking Nagelsmann, Tuchel, Enrique even, if the rumours are to be true, I'm sure will be pretty insistent on Champions League football. I thought at the start of the summer that we'd finish somewhere maybe between 8th and 6th, and Champions League was no chance really, but with everyone around us faltering, if we could just start turning a few of these disappointing draws into wins, then I think there may be a chance, But realistically, I think Europa League is probably more in keeping with what we deserve, although Brentford have somehow magicked their way up to 5th. So Monday marked the end of Ruben Amorim's tenure at Manchester United, a 14-month spell that promised transformation but ultimately delivered turbulence. His sacking arrived less than a day after a combustible press conference, to say the least, at Ellen Road, where he asserted that he was the manager, not the coach, and urged departments above him to do their job. In truth, the public flashpoint merely accelerated a decision that had probably been brewing for a few weeks, and if reports are to be true, a heated exchange during a meeting with Wilcox towards the end of the last week. It sounds as if he was expecting it to happen, and after the outburst of Leeds, it sounded like he wanted it to happen too. The context in which he delivered it felt partly manufacturers, and he gave the board absolutely no option but to pull the trigger, in my opinion. He certainly didn't have enough credit in the bank to deliver a back him or sack him ultimatum. When United hired Amorim in November 2024, the choice signalled a clear philosophical commitment. The club had moved decisively into sporting director model, reshaping football operations, and appointing a coach renowned for a 3-4-3, 3-4-2-1 identity forged at Sporting. The thinking was straightforward: recruit a systems coach whose methodology could become the club's spine, empower him with targeted signings, and finally start building towards some medium to long-term stability rather than this continuous 18-month, 2-year, 2.5-year cycle we seem to have adopted. Amorim's arrival was framed by words like clarity, pressing, and positional discipline. He spoke about building an attack inside the controlled space rather than merely the ball, urging patience while adaptation took hold. We all heard a compelling promise, football incoherence at last. I definitely bought into it. I mean, as I always do. We have to, right? But from the outset, Amorim's back three demanded specific profiles. Wing-backs needed to be athletic and relentless. Wide centre-backs had to defend big spaces, and the front line required crisp rotations between the two attacking midfielders and our central striker. In practice, though, injuries, poor form, and the inheritance of an imbalanced squad meant the plan rarely looked seamless. Amorim insisted on holding on to his principles, but as the months went on, it became obvious that to play the perfect 3-4-3, United would have to spend significantly. The club did back him in the summer, and we invested over £200 million. Benjamin Sesko was recruited to spearhead the attack, Brian Mbeumo for end product and that kind of versatility, and Mateus Cunha to connect phases between midfield and the front line. On paper, these acquisitions drew closer to the Amorim archetype. On grass, though, the conversion rate from profile to performance fell a bit short. United's campaign under Amorim last season ended at a modern era low. The club finished 15th in the Premier League, recording the fewest points in a Premier League season in their history, the most defeats and a negative goal difference that summed up both defensive fragility and attacking inconsistency. The historical resonance of 15th was heavy, a kind of emblem of just how far our weekly performances had dipped. Domestic cup competitions brought mixed consolation. In Europe, however, United found a measure of success, but ultimately when it came down to the crunch, a final against Spurs, we looked cagey. Amorim defended the choice to remain wedded to his shape well into the latter stages, but ultimately the complete lack of a plan B against an awful Spurs side denied United silverware. More punishingly, Champions League qualification. For the managers and players, Bilbao felt like an aching missed opportunity, but for the club's accountants, it also meant diminished revenue and a narrower margin for error heading into the next season. Probably the lowest point of Amorim's reign arrived near the start of this season when United were dumped out of the Carabao Cup by Grimsby Town. The manner of the defeats compounded humiliation, a fourth-tier opponent, a strong United lineup and a performance that looked tactically confused and emotionally flat for long stretches. Managers survive bad nights. They don't survive bad nights that serve as metaphors, though. Grimsby did precisely that. It struggled that the structural demands of Amorim's shape were outpacing the personnel and the collective habits of the squad. It also spoke to tension inside the dressing room about standards and selection. The manager's post-match sincerity admitting that the best team had won was noble, but it did not reduce the glare. The current season began with a watchful optimism. A full pre-season, new signings and tactical bedding in should yield like cleaner patterns. For a few weeks, United showed signs of incremental improvements in underlying play. More control in midfield zones, better wing-back timings and the beginnings of a front three interconnection that might finally produce some sustained pressure. The table told a more stubborn story though, and then by early January, United had played 20 Premier League matches, 8 wins, 6 draws, 6 losses. Good enough for 6th, and while 6th position kept Champions League qualification within mathematical reach, it didn't match the ambition or the investment. This snapshot framed the broader trend of Amorim's Premier League tenure. In 47 league matches in charge, United recorded 15 wins, 13 draws and 19 defeats. The win rate in Premier League fixtures sat at roughly 32%, with points per game hovering near 1.23, the lowest among United's managers in the Premier League era. Defensive returns remained troubling. A league goal difference of -6 over the span told of exposure in wide channels and vulnerability when opponents broke the first line of pressing. Across all competitions, the larger sample also reflected inconsistency. In 63 matches as United boss, Amorim compiled 24 wins, 18 draws and 21 losses, a win percentage of around 38%. Goals for and against were more balanced outside the league. 103 goals scored, 95 conceded, yet the league burden ultimately defines a United manager's legacy. On January the 4th, 2026, United drew 1-1 at Leeds. The match itself was a swirl of half chances, tactical tweaks, but familiar frustrations. What mattered more, though, was Amorim's press conference afterwards. He asserted once more that he was the manager, not the coach, emphasised that he would not resign, and urged upstream departments, including the scouting operation, to do their job. United's club structure has become more explicit. Recruitment and team building are now collaborative and led by football executives. The head coach operates within that framework. Amorim's repeated insistence on managerial sovereignty collided head-on with this reality. While the coach's frustration about January reinforcements was understandable, the public framing of the hierarchy obviously didn't sit well with them above him. Clubs rarely sack managers for press conferences alone, but press conferences can reveal fault lines that results have already traced. 24 hours later, the club parted ways with Amorim and placed Darren Fletcher in interim charge. There is a generous reading of Amorim's reign. United hired an identity coach and, in crucial ways, didn't fully complete the squad reshaping that identity demands. Wingbacks were regularly miscast, and if you hire a systems coach, the argument goes that you must commit deeply and for long enough. There's also a harsher reading. True elite coaches blend principle with flexibility. They maintain the spine of their philosophy while adapting shapes, roles, and risk management to fit the opponent, the personnel available, and the season's context. Amorim continually stuck by his guns, at times admirable, but ultimately far too rigid. Of late, matches cried out for a switch to a back four or a narrower midfield three to secure control. Those switches arrived infrequently and briefly, and ultimately too late. The attack often lacked variance, When wide service wasn't timely or direct runs didn't synchronise, United recycled possession without incisive central overloads and struggled to create high-quality chances at the right moments. Defensively, the spaces behind the wing-backs were repeatedly targeted. Len Yoro in particular became a regular target of this space by opposition. From looking like an assured young player in this position in his first season, his confidence and performances this year have wavered. Like the amount of space he afforded Morgan Rogers for that first goal at Villa Park feels more like a player lacking in confidence than asserting his instincts. United conceded too many transitional goals. The precise thing at Amorim's rest defence was designed to prevent. Implementing the system demands elite relationships and understanding throughout the squad. Partial application, especially amid injuries and form slumps, leaves a side caught between ideas. Results shape everything, but selection sagas linger. Amorim's period in charge featured ongoing debates about the integration of academy talent and the use of certain senior players whose form and roles fluctuated. The manager championed standards, intensity in training and positional discipline, a willingness to execute the game plan over individual improvisation. These are laudable in principle. In practice, United needed both discipline and moments of individual brilliance to paper overall structural learning curves. The ratio didn't materialise often enough across league fixtures, and without a significant improvement in set plays this year, I fear we'd be closer to 10th rather than flirting with those European places. Time is the currency top clubs are least willing to spend when performances remain erratic. United now faces a familiar crossroads: recruit another identity-first coach or install a results pragmatist. The right answer lies in blending both. But who? Okay, that's all for this week. Thanks for listening. Please like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and give me a follow at Sparky's Dream Pod on all socials. And please tell all your fellow Reds. This has been Sparky's Dream. Football, music, United.